This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Mateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China has pledged more financial support for unfinished property developments so they can finally be delivered to buyers. Unsettling polls for Japan's ruling party at 10 days before an election. Key media surveys find the LDP may lose its sole majority in the lower house for the first time since 2009. No longer a partner for reconciliation, North Korea says its constitution now clearly defines the South as a hostile state. And a forecast-beating profit result from Taiwan's TSMC wipes away investor concerns about waning global demand for the chips that power artificial intelligence. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, Chinese e-commerce platforms have long made inroads into the U.S. markets since the COVID-19 pandemic. But souring ties between Beijing and Washington threaten to turn online shopping into the next casualty of their rivalry. China says that its painful market downturn has bottomed out after 3 years of adjustment. The country's housing minister, Ni Hong, struck a positive tone at a much-anticipated media briefing today in Beijing. Well, he says that credit support for unfinished housing projects will nearly double to 4 trillion yuan, or more than $500 billion by the end of the year. CNA's Tan Sihui reports.
Another day, another news conference by top Chinese officials as China moves into high gear in its efforts to arrest a 3-year property slump. This one, led by Housing Minister Ni Hong, seeks to flesh out implementation details of measures to support the property market.
怎么做呢？主要抓2手，一手抓白名单，解决好项目的建设资金问题；一手抓交付进度，通过 压实地方政府、房地产企业、金融机构等各方的责任。我们按照市场化、法治化的原则，一楼一策，分类推进争取住房早日交付。
To ensure loans can be disbursed at a faster pace while protecting the rights of home buyers, officials said the whitelist aims to cover as many eligible housing projects as possible, with loan amounts for whitelist projects expected to double by the end of this year, up from 2.23 trillion yuan. So far, other tools such as the 300 billion yuan re-lending facility to turn unsold homes into social housing have been slow in implementation, as China's real estate sector still grapples with a large inventory of unsold and unfinished projects. So analysts believe this will go some way in easing some of that pressure.
Making it clear that all these commercial residential building projects will be in the whitelist is something that will increase the policy communication and will help the banks to understand the direction of Beijing. This will increase the policy transfer efficiency, and that will be a good sign for the property sector to bottom out sooner rather than later. However, given the size of that package, the size of the overall lending, 4 trillion, I won't say it's significantly above the market expectation.
China will also make a big push to redevelop housing units in so-called urban villages or rural collective lands in the cities. Officials pledged to offer monetized resettlements for residents for an additional 1 million such homes. It's hoped that housing demand arises from resettlements will help ease the supply glut while allowing local governments to acquire lands in the cities.
我们对重点城市做过统计，那就是35个城市有170万套的需求。那么全国地级城市有297个，大家可想而知，这种需求是实实在在的，也是还会更大的一种需求。
Meanwhile, officials from the Central Bank and Finance Ministry gave updates following announcements made last month. They say they've seen positive feedback, with adjustments to lower interest rates on existing mortgages set to complete by the end of the month. They will also guide local governments on issuing special bonds to buy land and absorb unsold housing inventories. Tan Sihui, CNA, Beijing.
And to unpack this further, our business correspondent Roland Lim is sitting here with me at this table. So, Roland, we've heard what the economists have said about those measures. So I'm curious to know what about the reaction among the public?
Well, while officials have actually expressed optimism about the property sector turning the corner, their announcement today drew mixed reaction on Chinese social media. At one point, real estate was the sixth hottest topic on microblogging website Weibo, with posts viewed over 7 billion times, with financial influencers like this one with almost 3 million followers attempting to talk up the sentiment. Another said the measures announced are not bad and urged his 11,000 followers or so to take advantage of the lower housing prices. But a poll on the platform suggested a more muted response from netizens, with about 2/3 of respondents feeling neutral about the topic in the last 24 hours. And for more insight into China's property sector, we now speak with Raymond Yong. He is Chief Economist of Greater China at ANZ, and he joins us from Hong Kong. Welcome to the show, Raymond. China going all out to prop up the property market. Will the new measures be enough, you think, to help shore up confidence in the sector?
I don't think that is a strong dose to shore up the confidence, especially from a buying perspective. I don't expect any V-shaped rebound because of today's conference. What I do see is that the regulators and including the central banks willing to provide funding support to stabilize the sector, especially with a massive liquidity injection to minimize the financial risk of builders and the current existing project. Now, look, so far there has only been 2.23 trillion RMB deployed to on the white list, but they promise to have to double the amount by the end of this year, and then we are just talking about 2.5 months remaining for this year. So I think the overall message of the ministry today is that they are going to utilize the existing facility quicker and also be prepared to increase the scale of the current support if needed.
Raymond, also correct me if I'm wrong here, but authorities, they seem to be under a lot of pressure to respond to all these housing anxieties among China's youth. But at the same time, many of them, they don't seem to plan to buy homes or even start a family anytime soon.
We also need to understand the housing policy of the central government now is not to support a full recovery of the commercial private residential project as in the past. We know there has already been change in the housing provision model. And the minister also said that they, for the young people, they should rather lease or rent property instead of just buying the property. Because in the past that most of the housing provision has been done by the private sector. There has been a larger complaint about the high property price, and that's perhaps result in a property bubble in not only in the top tier city, but also in the third and fourth tier cities too. But now with this affordable plus markets model, that's the flagship model talked by the minister. So it means that in the future, don't expect the property price to go up a lot. But for young people or for those who are living under poverty, they will be provided by or satisfied and fulfill the demand by the affordable housing model.
Raymond, speaking about property prices, the housing minister said that the market had bottomed out in October after 3 years of adjustment. Do you think it's too soon to make that call?
This is obviously the wish of the Chinese government, but so far we have not seen a noticeable change in economic statistics reflecting the change of housing construction, fixed asset investment in property, and even property sales itself. So it's still too early to conclude that today's measure or the top-up measure announced today will have a significant impact on construction and property activities over the next 2 or 3 months.
Raymond, I just want to hone in on the developers here. A lot of them still under financial duress. Many have defaulted on their debt obligations. And authorities say that there will be a further extension of loans for these developers. I mean, is that enough? Is that going to be able to tide them over?
Now, on this point, I actually think that the significance of today's announcement is that the government, including central bank and the ministry, side of the State Council, are willing to underwrite the property market by offering central government support by encouraging commercial banks to support the property lending. So from this perspective, I think that there is sufficient firepower from the liquidity point of view. The only bottleneck right now is whether buyers will change mind and coming back to the property market and consider property as an investment vehicle or the store of wealth future. If they only see that property is only to satisfy the housing needs, they could also go to the rental market instead of buying property. So I think from the liquidity point of view, the measure does relax the funding constraint of developers as well as the supply chains related to the property sector.
Raymond, going away from property into the bigger picture, third quarter GDP numbers out of China tomorrow. It's expected to underperform. It does raise the question, though, whether more stimulus is needed to spur growth, or is it already too late to meet its annual growth target of around 5%? Your views?
The first 9 months has seen a slowdown of activities, and one of the key reasons was that the local governments do not have sufficient funding to exercise their power to drive local growth. We continue to keep our GDP forecast for this year as 4.9% and expect that tomorrow's number would be 4.7% in the third quarter. If the local governments are willing to receive the support and take action and the mandates from the central government to drive economic activities, we do expect that some of the measures that have been announced will have some positive impact on growth in the next 2 months. So it is not difficult for the mortgager using their interest rate saving, which is about 150 billion RMB, to spend the money and to support consumption, and that would be able to provide some support to economic growth this year or the rest of this year. We are talking about 2.5 months. But the outlook is that I think that we should change our attention or to turn our attention to next year growth, and whether these type of support will actually alleviate some of the pressure from the structural constraint, such as the expectation of the property market or longer term expectation in the futures, and whether they expect China will be able to avoid deflation so that they are more willing to spend rather than save the money for future consumption.
Raymond, we will be looking closely at whether China comes up with more stimulus measures. That was Raymond Yeo, Greater China economist at ANZ. And I will be back a little later on with more business news.
All right, looking forward to that. I'll see you in a short bit, Roland. Well, turning our attention to Japan now, polls are suggesting that the country's ruling party, the LDP, may lose its majority in the lower house when elections take place at the end of next week. Well, such an outcome for the Liberal Democratic Party hasn't been seen since 2009. And the LDP needs 233 seats to achieve an outright majority in the 465-seat lower house of the Diet. And when it comes to the upper house, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has been relying on another political party for a majority. The party in question is Komeito, Japan's largest Buddhist lay foundation. While recent polls suggest that LDP may need this coalition in the lower house as well. Komeito generally backs the LDP, but the same polls have found that the party might fall below the 32 seats it had before the election was announced. The LDP will face off against the main opposition, Constitutional Democratic Party, next Sunday, the 27th of October. North Korea says that its revised constitution now defines the South hostile state. It follows leader Kim Jong-un's call earlier this year to designate Seoul as its main enemy. The North also plans to continue building permanent defenses along the border after demolishing transport links on Tuesday. All this in a week of heightened tensions, which saw Pyongyang accusing Seoul of sending drones to scatter anti-North propaganda. And that prompted the US, Japan and South Korea to condemn both the claim and for the North increasing tensions. A team involving 8 other countries was also formed to monitor potential violations of UN sanctions by Pyongyang. Official oversight of Pyongyang's banned nuclear and weapons program ended after Russia vetoed the renewal of a UN monitoring panel. Now the new grouping says it will address the threat arising from the North's ballistic missile program by tracking and reporting violations of the UN Security Council resolutions. Well, it breaks up next, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, the global artificial intelligence boom helping to fuel TSMC's record-breaking third quarter profit. We analyze the results with an expert after the break. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and as promised, Roland Lim is back in the studio and he has the earnings from the world's largest contract chip maker. Roland?
That's right. Taiwanese chip maker TSMC has reported a record-beating earnings for its third quarter, and it's betting it'll be able to sustain its strong growth on soaring demand for chips used in artificial intelligence, and that's despite ongoing concerns about global chip demand. Third quarter net profit surged about 55% on year to hit a record $10 billion. Revenue also came in at an all-time high, jumping close to 36% on year to $23.5 billion and exceeding the higher end of the company's guidance. The robust earnings comes amidst concerns that investors have misjudged AI and semiconductor demand. TSMC's chairman and CEO has emphasized that the demand for AI processors is real and will likely last for many years. The chipmaker has raised its fourth quarter earnings guidance. It expects revenue of between $26.1 to $26.9 billion. Now, for the full year, TSMC is aiming to grow revenue by 30%, with AI processors expected to account for about the mid-teens percentage of that total. To unpack TSMC's results and outlook, Rolf Bulk. He is equity research analyst at New Street Research. He joins us live from Singapore. Rolf, good to have you on the show. What do you make of the forward guidance given by management? Are you upgrading your weighting on the stock? Any price target in mind?
Yes, thanks, Roland, for having me. Well, you know what the last few days have shown us is that TSMC is really the only game in town when it comes to manufacturing these AI chips. We heard from ASML, which is TSMC's largest tool supplier, just a few days back, that Samsung and Intel are struggling with ramping up those leading-edge, very complex processes that are required for AI chips. They are pushing out the capacity expansion plans. And as we've seen this morning with TSMC, everything is still on track, revenues of close to 30%, and the outlook for next year is again very positive. We would expect another year of revenue growth between 25 to 30%, and AI will continue to count for a sizable part of that growth. Though not all of it, there are multiple growth drivers, and that is what makes TSMC such an interesting name. It's not just about AI. There's also smartphones. There's also more basic computer chips like CPUs, and the broader recovery that we see play out in the semiconductor market. And TSMC is exposed to all of that.
You mentioned Intel. How is Intel's outsourcing progressing? I mean, with Intel's in-house production in 2026 pose a significant risk to TSMC?
Yes, it's a major topic at the moment. So Intel is at the moment increasing its outsourcing to TSMC. 2025 is the year at which Intel aims for that to peak. So they want to bring back that manufacturing in-house. But that's a major question mark. That means that Intel needs to successfully ramp up that production of leading-edge processes. If they don't, they won't be able to compete with a major rival, AMD, which is fully outsourced to TSMC. So for Intel, it's really a make or break moment. And TSMC, if Intel does not succeed is the major beneficiary.
TSMC is set to start volume production of its cutting-edge N2 or 2 nanometer fabrication process second half of 2025. How much of an earnings driver will this be for TSMC?
Well, Roland, when a new process is ramped like N2 next year, initially it's a headwind to profitability. So we've seen gross margins that are hovering very close to 60% today. What I would suspect is that the moment that N2 is being ramped, that we will see a minor dip before that profit margin accelerates again towards 60%. But N2 will be a larger node, i.e., more volume, more revenues, higher ASPs than the N3 node, which is driving all of that revenue growth for TSMC today.
So considering the strong demand for AI and the increasing adoption of N2 chips, is the significant increase in long-term capital expenditure then justified?
Yes, I do think it is. TSMC needs to build out capacity, not just in Taiwan, but also in Arizona and the US and in Japan to meet demand for these AI chips, but also the broader semiconductor space. And that requires a lot of spending. For every dollar of revenues, TSMC is spending around 35 cents on CapEx. And I would say that next year, that CapEx budget should increase to around 40 billion or close to 40 billion compared to 30 this year. So that's a sizable expenditure. But TSMC, being the only manufacturer in town, has visibility on very high and stable returns of that CapEx. So they can be confident that every dollar they spend is going to come back to them in terms of returns over the coming years.
Any upside, downside risks to revenue growth in 2024-25?
Well, the upside would be increased outsourcing, either from Intel or indirectly from Samsung, which is having part of its smartphone chips manufactured by Qualcomm, which in turn has them manufactured by TSMC. That's the upside: increased outsourcing, very strong demand for AI, which could accelerate. Downside risk is the broader recovery, I would say. Smartphone market, PC market. It doesn't look like it's going to be a major growth year next year for those end markets. Any type of disappointment on that front would also impact TSMC. But I do think that probably at the moment the risk reward is more skewed to the upside than the downside.
Rolf, are you at all concerned about Taiwan's long-term competitiveness, given ongoing cross-strait tensions? The U.S. also encouraging TSMC to set up production and R&D facilities in the U.S. itself.
Yes, this has been a topic for quite some time, and well, at the end of the day, the technology value chain and the semiconductor supply chain in particular are heavily dependent, almost exclusively dependent and reliant on Taiwan. If something were to happen from a geopolitical standpoint that would disrupt that supply chain, that would not just impact TSMC, but every single semiconductor company that we can think of. In that context, I think that the odds of something materializing are very low, but it's a risk to monitor nonetheless. And TSMC is rightfully outsourcing part of its capacity to the US, to Europe, and to Japan, really in response of their customers in those markets, which are looking for a more secure and a more diversified supply base.
Rolf, appreciate those insights. That was Rolf Balk, equity research analyst at New Street Research. And that'll do it for the business news. Ateli.
All right, you're done for the day. Thanks so very much, Roland, for that. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, see how souring ties between Beijing and Washington can turn Chinese online shopping platforms into the next casualty of their rivalry. Hello again. You are watching East Asia tonight. China boosting credit support to the ailing property market in an attempt to shore up the sector. The country's housing minister says the industry is showing signs of revival as measures taken last month take hold. A Nikkei poll in Japan suggests the ruling Liberal Democratic Party might lose its sole majority in the lower house of the Diet in the coming elections. The survey shows that the LDP is likely to win only about 30% of the directly elected single-seat constituencies. And North Korea officially designates the South as a hostile state after revising its constitution. Pyongyang also reportedly building permanent border defenses after destroying key transport links just 2 days ago. Chinese shopping sites Temu and Shein are facing a crackdown in the U.S. despite hitting it off with American shoppers since the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, the White House announced new measures to close loopholes in its duty-free policy last month, targeting the Chinese online retailers. Well, Shein's share of the U.S. fast fashion market has doubled between 2020 and 2022, edging out big names like Zara and H&M. Well, Temu became the most downloaded app in the country 1 year after it launched. Well, this week, CNA's documentary series Insight takes a look at online shopping and whether it could become the next casualty of US-China rivalry. And we have thus producer Jerusha So in studio to tell us a little bit more. Now, Jerusha, just before you came in here, I was actually just looking at my phone. I was checking out some of the stuff on Shein and Temu. It is incredibly cheap. Like, you can get a winter jacket for like $20. So tell us a little bit about how do they keep the prices so low?
Right, so Shein is an online fashion retailer. Temu is a platform for small-scale sellers to launch their consumer goods, for example. And for both of them, they rely on thousands of manufacturers and suppliers in China who are able to produce goods at low cost. So then they enjoy the economies of scale in manufacturing, and then they can pass on the cost savings to the customers. I think another thing is also that they don't have any physical stores. Everything is online. And so they cut out a lot of their overhead expenses in that sense. But that's also come under scrutiny, their bottom dollar price tags. For example, for Temu, because they're a platform for these small-scale sellers, they're able to control the prices of their goods. So for this episode, I interviewed 2 Temu sellers, and one of them was also telling us about how Temu has been suppressing the prices of the goods that he's been putting on the platform. So here's what one of them has to say about the prices.
Peter Wang has been selling electronic products on Temu for a year.
一天上传10几20个产品，那就我把这个产品图上传上去，然后我要卖多少钱，我会自己写一个，对，然后如果他OK 的话，他就说你这个 OK， 如果他觉得你这个太贵了，他会说你，比如降到8块钱行不行？然后他会给你一个价格，那如果我也觉得 OK， 那我们就会按照这个价格去进行销售，然后我会备货到他的仓库去，但是销售过程中这个价格可能是会变的。 比如说最开始跟他谈好是10块钱，后面卖了一段时间之后，他可能会讲你这个卖到7块钱行不行？然后可能过一段时间他又会讲你这个卖到5块钱行不行？就是他会持续的去跟你谈这个价格。
So that's very interesting, Jerusa. I didn't know that Temu can give the sellers a price and they can actually negotiate about it. And a lot of these prices are rock bottom prices. I'm just trying to understand, does it make sense for the sellers? I mean, why do they still sell on Temu?
Right, so when I spoke to Peter Wang, he said that a lot of these sellers, they don't just rely on one platform. For him, he uses, for example, Amazon, another Romanian platform, and he's also considering TikTok Shop. But he did say that Temu does make it very easy for sellers to sell on the platform. So all he has to do when a customer places an order is to ship the goods to Temu's warehouse. Temu will settle everything else from delivery to marketing, for example. But he also added that Temu is just a platform for him to sell any leftover unsold goods. So I guess that's one of the price that he has to pay.
Very, very interesting. And I want to talk about the U.S. that announced some of these measures just last month in September, I believe, these new shipping rules. What's that all about? Can you just tell us a bit more?
Right, so we've talked about how Shein and Temu's prices are so low, and selling in the U.S. markets, that's given them a bigger advantage, where there is this duty-free policy called the de minimis provision. So any goods entering the U.S. Below $800, they are exempt from customs duties. And because Shein and Temu's prices are so low, for example, if a customer were to place, let's say, an order of 10 to 20 items, that would still fall below $800 and then into this de minimis shipment category. And so the U.S. Congress, they've accused Temu and Shein for skirting tariffs. They've said that they've paid $0, for example, compared to companies like Gap and H&M, which have paid $500 to $700 million in 2022. And so the Biden administration, they are coming after Shein and Temu, saying that they want to introduce new measures in order to protect the U.S. businesses. And so if the new measures do pass, we might see Shein and Temu's prices going up in the near future.
And I mean, before these new shipping rules were, even talked about, I mean, obviously another Chinese app, TikTok, that we all know about, also facing a possible ban in the U.S. I mean, based on your research, I mean, is there some kind of a link here?
Yeah, I think so. Their functions are different. TikTok is a social media app, and then Temu and Shein, they are e-commerce platforms. But I think the key concerns are surrounding user data collection and also their Chinese origins. So under China's national intelligence law, private companies have to turn over data to the Chinese government upon the government's request. And so in the recent TikTok hearing, we did hear TikTok's lawyer saying that Chinese e-commerce companies actually collect more data from TikTok itself. So one of the cybersecurity experts I interviewed had something to say about this. Let's have a listen.
It's definitely a sign of an era of much greater scrutiny on commerce between the United States and China, especially when it comes to technology, especially when it comes to apps, and especially when it comes to data. And there's a question whether these platforms, particularly Shein and Temu, are more data collection companies than they are even e-commerce platforms.
Do the American lawmakers have cause for concern? Well, back in 2018, Shein's then parent company, Zotop, was hacked. The breach leaked the personal information of 375,000 New York residents. Zotop was fined $1.9 million for this lapse. Last year, Pinduoduo was suspended from the Google Play Store after malware was detected, giving the app unauthorized access to a user's data.
For example, one of the types of data that it was trying to collect is data that you copy to the clipboard on your phone or that you store in the Notes app. So for example, if you were to copy a text message into an email, it would be stored on your phone's clipboard. Pinduoduo was going after those kinds of data, even though they had nothing to do with the app itself.
Yeah, so this year, 2 state attorneys general, they filed lawsuits against Temu, asking the company to review more information about its data collection practices and also its ties with the Chinese Communist Party, if any. So it remains to be seen what will happen to Temu and Shein.
We will be keeping a very close eye on that, and hopefully we'll have you back in the studio again to tell us more. Thanks very much, Jerusha,
Thanks for having me.
Over there. Well, of course, you can catch the online shopping frontier of U.S.-China rivalry tonight on Insight at 9 p.m. on CNA. And you can also watch it online on YouTube, MeWatch, and our website, cna.asia. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, we turn to the U.S., where the future of its climate policy could be on the line, with the 2 presidential candidates having largely different takes on the issue. The U.S. presidential election is just weeks away, but in hurricane-hit North Carolina, early in-person voting is due to start today. A key issue that Republican Donald Trump and Democrat Kamala Harris differ significantly is their vision for climate policy. And whichever candidate prevails in November will have a major impact on global climate change efforts. Ara Spitzer with a report.
These workers in Oakland, California, are swapping out a fossil fuel-burning gas furnace for an environmentally friendly heat pump, with some assistance from the U.S. government.
There's just great incentives at the federal and at the state and local and utility level to incentivize homeowners like the ones here today to make it easier for them to make that transition.
It's an example of a climate-focused measure subsidized by the Biden administration's $700 billion Inflation Reduction Act, which also includes major support for electric vehicles. In 2022, Kamala Harris cast the deciding vote in Congress to pass the biggest climate investment in U.S. history. However, its future is uncertain, as U.S. climate policy may shift dramatically again if Donald Trump wins in November. The former president has vowed to reclaim unspent funds from the Inflation Reduction Act. And he's threatened to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement once again. All of that will have an impact that extends far beyond the U.S. borders. The rejection of multilateral frameworks like the Paris Accord would imperil global emissions targets even further. And Trump's tariff-heavy, America-first approach to trade could usher in an era of less globalization and more competition. That could have a ripple effect on the global clean energy supply chain currently dominated by China.
So you can imagine that China's industrial base, which is effectively about electric vehicles, photovoltaics, critical minerals, etc., state-supported, flooding the world with cheap means of doing renewable transitions, that might just all get disrupted or disrupted further, which in a way risks holding other countries back.
The recent devastation of Hurricanes Helene and Milton has brought a renewed focus on the climate in this election year. But the top issue for U.S. voters by far is the cost of living, and Trump has argued that the Paris Agreement was a bad deal for the U.S. and other climate initiatives are costing the country too much. Yet, while the rhetoric is heated, there is still some optimism that the U.S.'s clean energy economy can weather the storm.
Yes, there is a healthy climate skepticism/denial in the U.S., but there's also a pragmatic center. The private sector in the U.S. is increasingly interested in, frankly, the value for money from clean energy. And there's a business case for clean energy. And regardless of the politics of the U.S., I think the U.S. private sector is going to look for sustainable, long-term, low-carbon solutions.
Still, the two candidates have vastly different visions for what to do about climate change. With a crisis that transcends borders, the world will be anxiously watching as things are likely to get worse before they get better. Ira Spitzer, CNA, San Francisco.
Urban living and the dream of a big city life have long been a draw for young people around the world. But rising rents and surging home prices in major population centers such as Tokyo have made affordability of housing a pressing issue. So what's the trade-off for young people who want to live on their own? Well, that's the subject of this Saturday's Money Mind special episode.
How to live in the big city on a small budget.
Staying in rental flat was a better choice than moving to an apartment.
I really dreamt of living here.
Young people looking for a home of their own in pricey urban centers. How small can you go?
狭いっす。もうこれ扉閉めると膝ぶつかるんで閉まらないんですよ。
じゃあ普段は
これぐらい上げてます。
The world's biggest city also has some of the smallest homes.
こんにちは。
Kazuki Hirata's micro apartment in Tokyo is just 9 meters square. That's smaller than an average car parking lot.
内見の時ちょっと狭いかなとは思ったんですけど、実際こうなんか家具とか入れて生活してみたら狭いなって思うことってそんなにないので。
The unit is a 3 tatami room that's based on the number of standard Japanese floor mats that cover the living space. To make it feel more spacious, the apartment has a 4-meter ceiling. The bed is in the loft. There's even space for storage. But not everything fits perfectly.
こう寝てます。でもやっぱこうぶつかっちゃうんですよね。なんでまっすぐ寝ようってなったらこういう風になっちゃうので、斜めにすれば足も伸ばせるっていう感じですね。
Despite the small size, Kazuki can fit in a workout. He has place to do his laundry, there's a fridge, and tucked into the hallway, there's a compact kitchen, although it's a little too compact for the film crew. There's also no space for pots and pans, but that doesn't stop Kazuki whipping up simple meals.
今年見つけた一番美味しいそうめんレシピです。すりおろしてなんかだしとオリーブオイルとかで激うま。これ本当美味しいんでぜひご自宅で。美味しい。
This micro apartment is about half the size of average studio apartments in Tokyo, and the rent is about 20 to 30% cheaper. At 84,000 yen, or $570, rent takes up about 30% of Kazuki's income as a sommelier and bartender.
狭さで考えるとちょっと割高かなとも思います。ここはただ都内で近いからっていうだけで、仕事終わるのも深夜とか、朝とかなので、電車ない時間に帰ってくることも結構あるので、歩いてでもタクシーでも帰ってこれるぐらいのところでこの辺り探してたので、でも結構そうですね、都心というか、利便性が結構大事だったなと思います。
若者に人気が出てる理由なんですけども、人気のある場所に比較的リーズナブルな家賃で住めるっていうところが一番大きな理由です。恵比寿ですとか中目黒ですとか、非常に人気があるエリアで作ってまして。
Real estate developer Spilitus has been building these micro apartments for over a decade. It says occupancy in its 100 properties is around 99%. Those under 30 make up the majority of micro apartment residents.
インフレがどんどん進んでいて、特に不動産ですとかアセットの値段だけ上がってくると、そうすると家賃は当然上がらざるを得ませんので、みんなが払える家賃にするためにギリギリのサイズで小さくしていくものが出てくると。
The average rent for studio apartments in Tokyo has increased by about 30% in the past 10 years. But affordability isn't the only consideration. It's a matter of lifestyle as well.
居心地の良さとか安心感っていうんですかね。結構狭いところにいるのが好きな人もいるじゃないですか、日本人って特に。それでこの空間、自分だけの狭い空間なので、その空間の居心地の良さっていうんですかね、かなと思います。囲まれてる方がいいなと思うので、ここ肘ついたりとか、ここにもあるんで、囲まれてる感じ、落ち着きますね。
There are also practical advantages to having only 9 square meters of living space.
広い、掃除する範囲が狭いぐらいですか。掃除機はロフトたまになんですか、ハンディクリーナーっていうんですか、車の中掃除するようなやつかけたりしますけど、こっちはもうクイックルワイパーと、あと床用の艶出しやってぐらいですね。
Another benefit of small living is cutting your shopping bill.
でも確かに減りましたね。もう基本的に家に何か買って持ってくれても食材ぐらいしかないなというか、そんな新しい服欲しいっていうこともないです。基本的に同じ服を着て出勤してみたいな。休みの日も、日曜日、毎週日曜日休みだとしたらもう日曜日同じ服着てみたいなことも別に思ってはなかったんですけれども、ただここ住んだらこの環境に適応できてるなっていうだけです。
These micro apartments are designed for and restricted to singles. People live here for about 2 years on average. But Kazuki's already been here 4 years and has no plans to move.
そうですね。何かなければ。予定ないですけど、結婚とか例えばですよ。そういうことがない限りは別に引っ越しはないかなと思います。職場が大きく変わるとか っていうのがなければ、ここに住んでいようと思います。
And you can catch Money Mind's full episode, Big City, Small Budget, on Saturday at 8:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. Now, Japanese engineers have come up with a new way to preserve the country's culture. They're using artificial intelligence to help people learn a traditional dance in hopes of keeping it alive in this modern age. Take a look.
Practicing movements from Japan's classical note theater with guidance on hand from AI. This Fujitsu technology is capturing their movements by camera, analyzing it, and comparing it to a model performance. It even gives prompt feedback. Takashi Ishikawa, a high school teacher, visited the Fujitsu booth at a trade show near Tokyo.
実際にやった動きを骨格で出されたので、例えば肘が前に出てない、出しすぎなんだとか出てないんだとか、あとは軸がブレてるんだとか、なんかこうなんだろう、言葉で言われるよりもビジュアルですごいこうスパッと見えて、しかも短時間で解析されたので、もっと練習したくなりました。
No theater dates back to the 14th century. It involves stylized movements made by actors in masks and elaborate costumes. Hidenori Fujiwara, head of the Human Digital Twin Division at Fujitsu, said Japan's shrinking population has put traditional culture at risk, but the technology could help.
今回カメラの映像から AI がですね、人の骨格というのを解析しまして、いろんな関節の角度だとか動きというのを捉えることができますので、それによって、人の CG モデルというのを作ってですね、それをお手本にして、生徒の人は見ることができる、そのようなソリューションになっています。
Before we go, Korean singer J-Hope of boy band BTS has been discharged from the South Korean military after 18 months of national service. The rapper enlisted last year and served as a drill instructor. Well, a crowd of BTS fans, aptly nicknamed Army, welcomed the 30-year-old at a military base east of Seoul, where he was stationed. Some had been camping since yesterday. Also there to celebrate his comeback was fellow member Jin, who was the first of the band to be discharged in June. Well, meantime, shares of BTS's label HYBE rose 7% on the stock exchange as investors cheered J-Hope's return. BTS have sold over 40 million records in South Korea alone since their debut in 2013 and are estimated to have contributed around $32 billion to the country's economy, attracting some 800 tourists every year. Well, the boy band's 7 members put their careers on hold in 2023 for military service, and they are expected to reunite after the remaining 5, Jungkook, RM, Jimin, Suga, and V, are discharged next year. And that wraps up Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. You can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Thanks for your company.